Welcome to the ACCOR Thought Leadership Breakfast at Virtuoso Travel Week. For those who don't know me, I'm Pascal Vizentener. I'm the Senior Vice President, Global Sales, Luxury and Lifestyle. And I'm so happy to welcome you here today. It's wonderful to see you all here, bright and so early. I'm so sorry for a Sunday, 7:15. It's a little bit difficult, but unfortunately, we had to find a slot, and that slot was available. On behalf of the more than 100 colleagues, ACCOR colleagues here in Vegas, our executive team, including 37 GM, who are here today in this room, but also Kamal Razali, our Secretary General and General Counsel, my boss. Omer Akkar, CEO of Raffles and Orient Express. Mark Willis, CEO of Fairmont. And Marcus Keller, COO of Sofitel, M Gallery, Sofitel Legend and Emblems. It is an exciting time for ACCOR. ACCOR is now one of the most powerful brands in luxury and lifestyle hospitality and one of Virtuoso top partner. Our iconic ultra-luxury and luxury brand includes Raffles, Orient Express, Fairmont, Sofitel, Sofitel Legend, and Faena. And our Virtuoso lifestyle brand includes So, SLS, M Gallery, and Banyan Tree. This year at Virtuoso Travel Week, we are focusing on how ACCOR continues to lead the way in sustainability, as sustainability is at the heart of everything we do. This said, I would like to introduce Marcus Keller, CEO of Sofitel, who will tell you more about what ACCOR and Sofitel are doing for sustainability. Have a lovely morning.
It's great to be here amongst so many friends, familiar faces, and once again, on behalf of all my colleagues, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for your time because I know it's a very, very busy week. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the 12 Sofitel and Sofitel Legend hotels who are here, and I hope you'll have the chance to meet them over the course of the week. This breakfast has become somewhat of a tradition for ACCOR, and some years ago we decided to change the format, and rather than just talking about what we're doing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but also to give you the opportunity to have a world-class speaker and to tell you something about what's going on in our business that hopefully is useful for you as you go back from what is a very dense week as well. And I'm going to introduce our guest speaker in a moment. As Pascal mentioned, this is a fabulous week for catching up, and obviously we're here to do business, but it's also a very important week. There are very few occasions during the year that so many leaders of luxury travel and tourism are in the one place at the one time. So this is an opportunity as well for us, not only to talk about business and new services and destinations, we're all here obviously for that, but also to talk about topics that are impacting our industry, and none more so than the long-term sustainability of ensuring that this remains a great industry for the decades to come. ACCOR has a proud tradition of corporate social responsibility, some of which has been delivered at the corporate level, but a lot of it has also been delivered through the individual brands. More than a decade ago, we launched a platform called Planet 21, and that has recently been replaced by a much more ambitious program driven by Brune Poisson, who is our Chief Sustainability Officer, member of the Executive Council, who is today making CSR part of our everyday business and part of everything that we speak about. ACCOR was the first international hotel group to commit itself to net zero carbon by 2050, which means a midterm goal of reducing 46% by 2030. That means that hotels by design need to change, and to become sustainable by design, I'm going to use just the example of the Sofitel Barrio in Casablanca in Colombia, which opened just recently, who achieved their LEED certification largely thanks to the efficiency of energy and water consumption that they have on that property. But also older hotels, the Sofitel Legend, the Grand in Amsterdam, which dates back to the 1600s, is Green Key Gold certified because of the investment that they've made in ensuring that that property keeps up with the expectations of tomorrow. It's not all about carbon, of course. Last year, we eliminated single-use plastics in 84% of our hotels, and we plan to finish that job this year. It goes beyond that to how do we resource, how do we source more locally, how do we reduce food waste, which means putting in place concrete measures for measuring the amount of food that we use and how much we waste, about water efficiency, but also about using this industry as a social elevator in developing countries to give people opportunities and careers, and particularly for women, as we have a group target of 40% of our general managers as females within the group. And I'm proud to see that in the room we have many of our female general managers. I can see Emmy smiling across the room there, so welcome, Emmy. We plan to do all of that without impacting the product, the service, the experience, and that high-touch value that your customers have come to expect from Raffles, from Fairmont, from Sofitel Legend, from Sofitel, and from all of the luxury brands within the group. So I can be very proud of the heritage that we have, but also very proud of the plan we have moving forward.
I want to give some context and insight into my background and the work that I've done over the last few years to really drive forward climate action, and to speak personally to why climate action is so important to young people like me. And so my story really started when I was just 12 years old. Both of my parents are from Iran, and growing up, I would visit Iran almost every single summer, and I would go to my grandmother's house. And I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. And I remember right after my 6th grade class about climate change, I went on my last trip to Iran. And with the context of my climate education, it was shocking to me how awful the circumstances in Iran were. I was struck by the fact that I learned that temperatures in the Middle East were rising more than twice the global average. And the air pollution in Iran was so bad that I couldn't even see the stars at night. And I later found out that in Iran, thousands of people are being hospitalized every single day because of how poor the air quality is. And I began to talk about this issue with my relatives, using these buzzwords I had learned in school, like carbon dioxide emissions and global warming. And it was shocking to me that my relatives really greeted me with blank stares. And they had very little understanding about the state of the climate crisis and the research, and so I wanted to understand why this was. And I found a study that read only 5% of Iranian students could properly explain the greenhouse gas effect, and that there was actually a systemic lack of climate literature available in Farsi, which is Iran's native language. And although my experience may be anecdotal, the reality is that just a few years ago, 40% of adults in the world had never heard of climate change. So we are still making enormous progress towards ensuring that the global public is educated about the urgency of the climate crisis and the need to take immediate action. And so this experience for me as a young girl in middle school was incredibly transformational, particularly because it showed me that there was an opportunity to actually make a difference and not just be paralyzed in this fear that I was being forced with this crisis, that the people around me who I was supposed to look to for advice and for guidance didn't know anything about, but that I was able to work with my mom and translate climate resources into Farsi so that I could teach my relatives about climate change. And this simple action that I was able to do was able to have an enormous result on actually ensuring my relatives knew about this issue. And for me, that was really the first step that I took on my journey to becoming a climate activist and to doing the work that I'm doing today. And so I spent the rest of my high school years, I was energized by what I did in Iran, and I came back to the US and I spent high school volunteering with Greta's Fridays for Future and movements like 0 Hour to really mobilize my peers to go out into the streets, to strike for climate action, to find ways that they could implement and talk about sustainability in their communities. And what that led me to do was during my senior year of high school, when I was 18, I decided to start Climate Cardinals. Because although I had all these experiences volunteering with these various different climate organizations, I realized that there was still a crucial factor that was missing, which was that almost all of our literature, all of our resources were only available in English. And that's despite the fact that 75% of the world doesn't even speak English, but 80% of scientific literature is only available in English. And even the UN's IPCC report, which is widely regarded as the most renowned piece of climate literature in the world, is only officially available in the 6 UN languages that account for less than half of the world's speaking population. All of which to say that there was this enormous issue that I was really shocked that some of the largest climate organizations in the world seemed to not really be doing anything about. So in my senior year of high school, I ambitiously decided to start Climate Cardinals with the goal of ensuring everyone everywhere could access climate education. And so we, on the very first day we launched, used social media and were able to reach hundreds of thousands of people and had over 1,000 young people with an average age of just 16 sign up to volunteer with us. And over the last few years, we've now grown to over 10,000 volunteers across 80 countries, and we've been able to translate over 1.5 million words of climate resources into over 100 languages, with almost no fundraising, working completely on a volunteer basis in between homecoming dances and homework, because we cared so much about making an impact in the face of the climate crisis. And I always would have my friends, I would have my parents, people ask me why I was spending all my time really on my computer in my dorm or in my bedroom, working so hard to advance this issue without any expectation of return. And the truth is, it's because the reality of the climate crisis is shocking. It's scary. When you think about the fact that my generation is already experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis at a rate 3 times higher than our grandparents, there is unprecedented flooding around the world, there are droughts, there are heat waves. Look at what's happening in Hawaii right now. The wildfires are being dramatically exacerbated by climate change. And my response always was, of course I'm doing this work, of course I care, and in fact, how can other people not care? And in the course of my work with Climate Cardinals, there are a few different learnings that I had, namely about the power of partnerships and collaboration. And so about 6 months after I started Climate Cardinals, I was nominated by the UN to join the UN Secretary General's inaugural Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And I served for 2.5 years in the role as the youngest climate advisor to the UN. And in the experience, it was an incredible learning for me to see how young people could push the UN to be more ambitious and to push the UN to implement what we thought were incredibly effective pieces of messaging, namely around the fact that we need to end all new fossil fuel development and that we need to invest heavily in recruiting young people, young talent, and bringing them to the decision-making table so that progressive voices like mine, agitators, people who want to move the world forward, actually have a stake and the ability to influence outcomes. And so that leads to kind of the most recent development of my work with Climate Cardinals, which was that a few months ago, we actually partnered with Google, and we were able to leverage their newest AI and machine learning assisted translation technologies to translate over 800,000 words of climate resources into over 40 languages. And so now my experiences have really shown me across a vast variety of disciplines that, whether it be in the nonprofit sector with Climate Cardinals, in the governance sector with the UN, or in tech with Google, everyone has the opportunity to make a difference and to do their part. And in fact, the world is better for these different entities collaborating and working together to move the world forward. And I'm not here to preach to the choir, because I know many of you care dramatically about sustainability and about moving your industry forward. But really, my hope is to also talk about the reasons why. And the reasons why need to be rooted in the urgency and the fact that just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of the world's industrial emissions. So no matter how much I do or individuals and young people do, the reality is that the people in power, the ones who are the stakeholders and the CEOs, these are the ones who need to lead by example and selectively make these choices to be bold and ambitious and not just think about the bottom line, but to think about it from a place of human rights and about investing in this generation, my generation, and ensuring that we have a livable future. Because the recent events that we've been seeing truly are shocking. They're heartbreaking. And it's scary for me as a young person. And the only thing that I can do and that many people can do is use our voices. Use our voices to share our stories and to talk about why we think sustainability is so important. And even when it does come to the bottom line, the statistics show over half of Gen Z and millennials are willing to pay more when it comes to investing in products and services and experiences that are certified as sustainable. And of course, in the hospitality industry, I mean, the tourism industry is responsible for 8% of global emissions, and then 20% of that comes directly from the hotel industry and hospitality. And there's a wide variety of steps that many of the people here are already taking, whether it ranges from improving energy efficiency to improving waste production. There's a myriad of steps that can be taken, but really the root needs to come from the right place, which it needs to be that the sense of urgency needs to be rooted in the calls from scientists around the world, the calls from young people around the world, explaining that this is not a matter just of business, but also a matter of humanity and protecting our planet for future generations to come. Thank you.
You had said that 71% of the emissions were from 100 companies that you had identified. How receptive have they been with what your message is?
Yeah, I think that the reality is that greenwashing is pervasive in the industry. It's really shocking when you Google climate change. One of the first results on Google is actually a myriad of different oil and gas companies promoting their efforts to be more sustainable. And I remember I read online this shocking, I won't name the company by name, but one of the big players in the oil and gas industry had paid a PR firm to commission 1,500 articles on how they had invested in a green project in renewables. And that green project only produced enough electricity to power a single bus. So when you think about instances like that, they're not isolated. And it's a very real reality that it's going to be very, very hard to get these industries to change. And that's why I think a lot of my time is best spent in two ways, which is one, my generation, people my age, are going to be the ones who are rising to positions of power. And so starting with my peers and using social media to educate them through my following base is where I think has the biggest potential to make lasting, systemic, sustainable change beyond the people who clearly are not hearing the calls to action. But then twofold, I've seen from my work with the UN, from my work with Google, that there are industries that are willing to change, and it's more so about ensuring that I can have concrete, progressive dialogue that's honest with those stakeholders, and also that other young people like me can actually have jobs in those industries. And I always tell my peers, every single job can be a climate job. You don't need to study environmental science to make a difference. You can work in fashion, you can engineer more sustainable textiles, you can work in engineering, you can work on how we can improve the efficiency of renewable energy. There's a myriad of different things every single one of us can do.
Thank you, Sophia.
Hi, Sophia. You mentioned that Gen Z millennials are willing to pay more for products if those products are sustainable or lean into their philosophy of everything that you're promoting. Do you spend time talking to these corporations about that? Because I think that if they can sell their products more expensively, that's better for their bottom line, and so there could be a positive impact from that perspective, as opposed to just saying, you guys have got to change because you're ruining the world.
Totally. I think that it's hard because you need to have messaging that plays to both sides. I don't think it's fair to just talk about climate through the perspective of it being a business issue, because this really is an issue that if we don't do something about it, we are ruining our planet for future generations. So I think it is very important to preempt the message in you need to be taking action because you care about me, you care about your children, and it needs to come from a place of goodwill and empathy. But with that said, I also understand we have a global economy, things need to tick, things need to turn, and I 100% do often share these statistics where there was like a report by Deloitte. It found like 60% of millennials were willing to pay more. There's still a lot of research actually that needs to be done on, there's virtue signaling, nobody is sure what the green premium is, and it's still something that's evolving. And something to your previous question, I think a really, really big part of all of this is that there needs to be a certain level of accountability that doesn't just come from self-course correction, and that means industry regulations coming from the government. Because people sometimes, unfortunately, need to be forced to take action. And that's why I think a lot of productive conversation does come from, I work with a lot of companies that also are involved in lobbying and trying to get better regulations passed. And also open sourcing innovation is something that I think is really important. So sharing your learnings with competitors and just with the general industry as a whole to move the world forward and not being stuck in a narrow competitive mindset is another thing that I think can help to advance the world forward, because also then we're able to push costs down, make renewable energy the most obvious option, not just because it's better for the planet, but also because it's cost competitive.
Hi, Sophia. My name is Miguel. I'm from Guadalajara, Mexico. And I just wanted to ask you if all these climate change we're suffering as a planet, it's right now caused by humankind, or is it possible that we're moving us to another ice age or heating age that we've had some hundreds or million years ago?
I mean, the science is unequivocal that climate change is a real and pressing threat. And but I think that there still is a lot of misinformation and disinformation in this space, which is what me and Climate Cardinals are trying to combat. Because it's actually, I always like to share this story because I think it's incredible. But nobody really knows this, but the notion of the personal carbon footprint and personal consumption was actually a marketing tactic that was coined and peddled by the oil and gas industry to make individuals feel like they were responsible for the climate crisis. There's a really funny meme I love to always post on Instagram and Twitter. And it's like the CEO of Shell, and he's filling out like a personal carbon calculator, being like, oh man, I'm doing better. When, of course, the reality is his company is a huge reason why we're in the disaster that we're in. And I always like to say that that's why we need to focus on overarching systemic change rather than we as consumers should not be wringing our hands about, oh, I took a flight to Mexico or I took a car to work today. That's not the reason climate change exists. It's because of fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry is responsible for the vast majority of global emissions, which is why the clear and proven scalable tactic is investing in clean and renewable energy.
Hi, Sophia. First, congratulations. I'm from Mexico City, and it's very impressive what you are done. I have daughters on your age, and really, congratulations. My question is, for me, it's very clear what the hoteliers can do to change the climate or to put steps. But we, as a travel advisors, are very little things that we can do. Is that really making a change? What do you suggest us in our business or your office to do to really help the environment?
Well, in terms of tourism, the hospitality industry, there's a variety of different steps that I can spend, 20 minutes going through a full lecture of all the ways to improve energy efficiency. And what I would say generally is that, of course, investing in ways to make your industry better, even if it's on a micro scale, is incredibly effective. Like I think about what my uncle shares with me every day where he's like, oh, like we got rid of single-use plastic, or we did this, or we did that. It's hard to feel like we as individuals are able to make a difference, but the reality is that some of the most impactful ways of creating change are to run pilot studies, to do what you can in your own local jurisdiction, in your own hotel, and to share those learnings with a broader community and to see how it can diffuse from there. And that's why I always like to say every single one of us has the potential to make an impact, because it's going to take a chorus of voices calling for change from the top to actually move the needle and to move the industry forward. And I think it goes back to my previous point, which is that when it comes to climate, the most the best way I like to think of it is that you need to think about where your unique skill set is and what problems you identify. Because for me, the reason why I've been able to make such an enormous impact with Climate Cardinals is that I picked such a specific, niche, unique problem, which was the fact that climate resources are incredibly inaccessible to people who don't speak English or who don't speak the 6 UN languages. And now we've been able to translate hundreds of thousands and now millions of words of resources into over 100 languages. And so for you, I would give the same advice, which is find a small problem, something that you are very cognizant and aware of. Most of us can think of at least one thing that is wrong in our local jurisdiction, and then think about ways that you can implement change and fix that, and then share your learnings with a broader community. And I think that's really how we can diffuse change and make an impact.
I'm so impressed with the passion that you bring to this project and all the things that you've accomplished. How can we follow you to keep up with what you're doing, even though, not your age demographic, but I'm very impressed with what you're doing and want to keep up with what's going on?
Well, thank you so much. That's very, very kind of you. I'm at Sophia Kianni on all my social medias. I would say maybe for this group, I love LinkedIn. I actually post on LinkedIn almost every day. So that's probably the best place to keep up with me. But I love Instagram and Twitter too, if any of you are on that. I think my content is also more personal and sharing my life as a 21-year-old. But it's very professional on LinkedIn.
And we will share with you all the details to follow Instagram and all the social media. And also, I think you have a foundation?
Yes, and anyone who wants to support the work that we're doing as well, you can go to climatecardinals.org, you can email us, you can donate, and we would love to work with you guys to really invest in having more young people move the world forward through climate education.
Hi, I have a question. I'm Anthony. I'm based in Hanoi, and Hanoi has pretty much the world's worst air quality, or one of the top 3 in the world, or bottom 3, I should say. I just want to mention a small story. One time, the air quality was almost at 300, right? The AQI. And I was complaining at work, saying, this is just, why doesn't somebody do something about this, right? And one of my salespeople turned to me and said, Anthony, you really don't understand. The only thing we care about is money. And it's making as much money as possible because obviously it's a developing country and the salaries are not very high. For example, a lot of our salaries are $250 a month, $300 a month plus service charge, right? So of course money is an evil in this type of situation. And you mentioned earlier about education, right? That education is absolutely essential. So is there a body, besides the UN, for example, that is actually trying to, shall we say, work with the education departments in various countries to try to change the mindset? Because yes, my kids, if I'm wasting water, they give me hell. If I travel too much, they give me hell, right? But they went to the UN school, so they've had this ingrained. So how does that work? Who and how is the education being affected or improved?
From a larger holistic view, I'll give an example, which is that when I worked with the UN on their Youth Advisory Group on climate change, we organized a conference called Youth for Climate, which was the first conference of its kind, where we invited over 400 young people from around the world, from over 100 countries, and they came together and they developed a set of recommendations for world leaders. And I co-chaired one of the working groups, and it was Climate Conscious Society. And one of our biggest calls to action was having governments invest more in education, climate education particularly, and also in upskilling young people and preparing us for green jobs, green certifications. And while I was researching that, it was actually very horrifying how bad climate education still is in a lot of states in the United States. It was like six states received like a failing grade trade on climate education. And then that's why I actually think social media is one of the most powerful tools we have. I'm able to reach millions of people every single week by using social media to talk about climate change. And that's why Katharine Hayhoe, who is one of the most prolific climate scientists of our time, she always says the most important thing you can do when it comes to climate change is talk about it. Because even in the mainstream media news, climate change is something that so often gets doled out, or we just kind of accept it as a status quo. And so the easiest way that we as individuals can have an impact is by sharing about climate change, is by pushing out the IPCC report, while of course we also have the ability to influence local legislation and local impact. And that's why I always tell people my personal recommendation, in addition to what Katharine Hayhoe says, which I think is incredible, is if you care about climate change, the number one thing you can do is vote. Go and vote for a candidate who believes in climate change and who is committed to passing progressive climate legislation, of course, climate education being a facet of that.
Well, this is quite the way to kick off this week. We're all feeling somewhat unaccomplished in this room at the moment. And you've worked incredibly hard on the public sector, where I hear you saying is it's in the private sector that next change is going to occur. So you have a lot of entrepreneurs in the room, a lot of leaders. We all are being asked to track like CO2 emissions for planes and corporate reports that probably nobody reads. What are one or two tangible suggestions that you would make, i.e., instead of a fruit basket that nobody eats, plant a tree? Instead of putting in this CO2 emissions in a corporate report, make a recommendation to a website. So I would love to, I'm a big action person and get things done, so I'd love 2 suggestions, if possible, for this group. So next year we can see if we've made a difference.
Totally, I love that. I think my number one suggestion would be to start with creating room for conversation and dialogue. So getting everyone in your sector together, in your specific discipline, or whatever sector of your industry that you're in charge of, and then have a conversation of what do you see that is currently wasteful and how could we fix it? If you go and look at like what has our neighboring hotel done? I always love going to hotels because I have to travel a lot for work or for school, and I'm like, oh, I love that this one, like I can put in my card, and then if my card isn't there, then it automatically won't turn on the lights. I have to turn it off, so every time I leave my room, the lights go off. Even these little things, and that's why I think that it more so is about, I wouldn't sit here and say something that's going to be a standard one size fits all, but really it's about getting everyone together and asking honestly, what are the small changes that you think that we can implement? And that's why I think that conversation and dialogue, and even creating room for things like this to happen, where you might have a random speaker who comes in, and then it really is what inspires someone in your group to say, hey, tomorrow I want to make a difference, and something that I realize is that our water usage is awful in our hotel. Let's go and look. Let's ask our other peers, what have they done to improve the water consumption, and how can we implement that same change? Because it's going to look different. You guys are all at different stages of your sustainability journeys. Everyone is at different levels of progress. So it's about an audit, about starting from scratch, honestly auditing where are we at and where do we want to go and how can we get there?
Sophie, I would like to know, do you have political aspirations? Because I would love to vote for you someday.
That's very, very kind. I love getting questions about like, oh, well, like, what do you want to do next? And I think it's always really important to share. Like, I am literally 21. Like, I finished my junior year of college. I still have another year left at Stanford. I'm working on a startup right now. I'm actually taking a year off of school. And if you had asked me like 3 years ago, did you think you would be, you know, addressing a room full of people or running the largest youth-led climate organization in the world, I would have thought you were crazy. So I have no idea. But I do know that I think that political progress is one of the most important tools when it comes to actually advancing change. And whether I'm directly involved in it or indirectly involved in it, it is something I want to make an impact in.
Other question?
I think
Or
someone
comments?
right there.
Oh, sorry.
Also, the food looks great. I hope you guys are also eating.
I come from Africa. where basically the drought is very important for us, not only on the wildlife, but also on the population. And unfortunately, sometimes when you work in Africa, you have the impression that some of the country basically are buying that conscious. Because when you are saying that some companies basically are saying that they will recycle clothes and they are adopt in Africa, yes. I mean, how do you believe that we can tackle this topic? Because maybe some of the countries are doing better, but unfortunately they're impacting the others.
Yeah, well, I think it was said in the opening address, but investing in developing countries and ensuring that they're rooted in sustainability from the get-go is really important, because now we have a situation where in so many developing countries, or so many like hotels, for example, that have already been created, it's millions and millions of dollars that have been invested in building something from the ground up that is inherently unsustainable. And now all this work needs to be done to retrofit, when actually we have the opportunity in places like Africa to start from scratch and build from the ground up and build in a way that we have had all of these learnings. And I think it was yesterday I had published this tweet, but it was so shocking to me that if you look at the state of climate change, the vast majority of global emissions are coming from the global north, they're coming from the US, they're coming from China, but then it's Africa and these marginalized communities that are on the front lines that actually have to face the brunt of the impact. They're the ones that have the disproportionate amount of drought and floodings. And that's why I think it is so important also to have a conversation about money and privilege, and recognizing that a lot of us are in a situation where we have the ability to influence outcomes. And so we shouldn't just be preaching to the choir, but instead auditing, honestly, what can we personally do to make an impact? And I mean, that's what I've done just as a young person, thinking about, well, what can I do to make a difference as someone who's just still in college? And I've maximized that to the greatest possible extent. And that's why I love talking about climate cardinals, because I'm like, listen, if a group of teenagers from around the world have been able to work with everyone from the UN to Google in their free time, unpaid, and make a difference, at a certain point, it really is about how much do you care? And that's the question that I love to ask, and the question that I love to push on. Because the reality is, the biggest impact that I can have is using my voice to inspire and mobilize others by sharing my story, and that's the biggest impact almost every single person can have.
Well, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that I remember the days that we used to sit around and look at the logo you were making for the climate cardinals and asking if we should put the wing here, if we should color it green, if we should color it red, and look where you are now.
Yeah.
I am proud of you, and I think in order to make change, you need to have awareness, and you're doing a fantastic job doing so, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's why it's also so important to think about who are you surrounded with. Like, my family is such a large reason why I care so much about climate change. And that's why I think creating room for dialogue, having at least one disruptor in the room, the annoying person who is telling you there's so much more that you could do, is important. We need to feel uncomfortable sometimes, and we also need to be surrounded by people who do want to make change happen, even if it's as little as telling me that my design for my logo doesn't look good because it needs to incorporate blue.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I joined ACCOR recently, in February, in fact, coming from the ownership side. I worked for the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the State of Qatar, the investment arm of the State of Qatar in the hospitality industry. And I joined ACCOR as part of the transformation of ACCOR, the recent transformation of ACCOR. For those of you that are not aware, but there's recently a new corporate structure that has been set up, that has been put in place. Two divisions. One division regrouping the premium, mid-scale, and economic brands with a dedicated CEO and a dedicated team, and another division dedicated to the luxury and lifestyle brands, and similarly with a dedicated CEO. And we have a number of the CEO of the brands that are here. The luxury and lifestyle division is a brand-led organization, is having a CEO dedicated to a specific brand and a dedicated team along with that CEO to precisely focus on that brand. So we are, with this new structure in place, the intention obviously is to better address owners and guest expectations. We basically, of course, has also listened to all of you. There was basically a general comment made by, ACCOR being this big machine with 45 brands, and how can someone work in the morning on an economic brand and the afternoon, working on the ultra luxury brand? And it's exactly this that has been addressed with this new organization. And guess what? This is working well. The market has been very receptive. Our revenues have grown significantly since last year. We've published our earnings for H1. They're plus 35% versus 22, which is a great signal. We're already seeing the effect of that new organization. Hotel owners as well. We're getting fantastic feedback from hotel owners. And as part of this new organization, we're obviously having also a new sales structure for the luxury and lifestyle division. So it's a new team, we are having additional resources to better target certain markets, to better target certain segments as well. Entertainment, for example. We are also getting, we're stronger in the US. As I mentioned earlier, we had a GM conference for Raffles a few days ago, and Omer Omerakar, the CEO of Raffles and On Express, who is here, announced that we're opening an office in New York. So the idea is to show muscles in the US market as well. ACCOR is getting closer to you, all of you that are based in North America, and is a strong message we're sending here. So we obviously have big intentions for various markets, and we are incredibly proud and delighting having you as well. We're very grateful for everything you do with us. Without you, we won't be doing much. So this has to be recognized. So on behalf of all my colleagues at ACCOR, we thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. We thank you for everything we do together. So thank you so much. And just a few words. I want to come back on ESG and Sophia. You've been very impressive. I have a daughter. She's 6, right? She's turning 7, so she's more into Taylor Swift now than ESG. But I want to say I want to come back on we had an advisory board a few months ago in Mexico, and some of you in the room were attended that event, and we had a presentation from our head of ESG. And the feedback we got was, well, you should speak more about this. Well, it's great what you guys are doing. And the comment was, you should speak more because you're very committed to ESG. You should not speak more because you're not doing enough. It's because ACCOR is really impressive in terms of its commitments towards ESG. So I'm glad that today we're speaking about this. And ESG, we tend to focus a lot on the E of ESG, environment, but ESG is social and governance as well. And on the S, on social, we're also doing a lot. So establishing positive relationships with local communities is equally important. For example, procurement of goods, of food locally is important. The well-being of our staff, our hotel staff, is important. All of this is part of the ESG commitments of ACCOR. And we're publishing basically our objectives. This is something like anyone in this room can read. So we will be judged for this on our commitments and firm. And we're strongly willing to continue leading the way on those commitments. So we'll continue to talk about this. You will hear about us on these commitments again. Thank you so much.